Good evening. Welcome to the Township Board of Trustees meeting for Thursday, February 14th. And Mr. Mansour, do you lead us in the pledge?
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
What was that? Okay. We got a sure, but we get our technology working here. Well, happy Valentine's Day to everyone as we're getting everything going here.
And also with you.
Okay.
You're still free to say that.
There we go.
I hated it.
So first off, as we call the meeting to order, I'll ask for an approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Support. Okay, is that for the consent agenda and the regular agenda?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? With that, we will open the floor for citizen comments. We'll start on the left side of the room.
I left my quote, Al Mansour, pen at the store.
Good evening, Mr. Ert.
Good evening, Ed, 7212 Porter Road.
Do you have an extra?
Happy Valentine's Day. I happened to go to the city meeting last night, so I'll make a few comments on it. And the first comments I want to make is on this Fox News article here that I read. Several of the Grand Blanc City Council aren't happy and say they were blindsided. Where have they been for the last 2.5 years or so? How can you be blindsided?
Were they blindsided that they had a meeting that night?
Blindsided by your dissolution.
Oh.
Dissolving this thing. Yeah, thanks for correcting me there. That's what they were blindsided by. They didn't know that was coming. But I remember that same statement about 2 years ago at your first joint meeting with the city and the township. They weren't aware if there was any problems. Yeah, we don't know nothing about this. Same scenario. They're doing it again about 2 years later. But anyhow, they say this dissolution was because of the study that the township did. And now you dissolve this contract or this partnership because of that study. I don't think that's really accurate. They're assuming that. There was more facts that went into this, and I hope that the city council is listening to this, or will listen to this tape, because it wasn't that study you did that caused this. There were more factors, many factors, going back years. So anyhow, and I heard in there they want to negotiate again. I've been negotiating for 2 years or better, okay? That come up again in this news article. Again, we've negotiated enough, it's done with. So anyhow, back to the meeting. One of the things they did is they rescinded the 1.5 mils, which you probably know. Why they did that, I don't know. I started taking notes and everything became to be just nonsense, so I'm going to flip through some of this stuff. There you have a new council person in the city. His name is Chris Carr, the way I understood it to be. He said this was probably an emotional decision on this board that did that, basically not fact-based. I don't think I never seen him at any of these meetings that we've had for the last couple of years or heard of him. How can he determine what the reasons were for your decision to dissolve the fire commission? And I know for a fact it's not emotional, it's very fact-based. And the city should be told that. A lot of facts were made and went into this, a lot of thought. Just by this meeting that I went to last night is enough to say that, yeah, the commission should be dissolved because the partnership, that meeting was so screwed up as far as I'm concerned. Nothing's been said, was said in that meeting about 36 square miles of fire services being needed. It was all about the 4 miles, the 4 square miles, and how they house the fire department, and how they're the big hub for all this stuff. I don't know where they got that from. That's all thought. That's their assumption. Okay? But that was brought up. And they did make a motion to try to negotiate again with this board. I've already done it for a couple of years. I hate wasting money on this thing again. But the mayor did say that if you do decide to negotiate, everything's on the table. So that was said there. I haven't been able to see the Views article. I guess that was out today. But these are the notes that I got. And I just want to remind you in the city that the longest run in the city is the shortest run in the township. And if we talk about burn rates of burning doubles every 30 seconds, if, for example, you went in the city the 2 miles out to the border of it in 4 minutes, and you had 25% of a house lost in that 4 minutes, and they were able to save 75. Now, when you get to the northeast corner of the township, in the same scenario, that house won't be standing. So there is really, the city has some very prime service. I'd lose my home if it was in the same situation. So, that being said, some people, that's the average, 7 minutes, 6 point whatever it was. Some people get better, some people get less. It seems the city just gets the better. Again, that thing came up blindsided. How can the city say that when a year ago, they went out, around a year ago, and asked another community for fire services, what the cost would be? Why would you go out and ask that question if you didn't see this coming down the road? They weren't blindsided, they're playing games. So, that being said, happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ert. Anybody else wish to make public comment? Okay, we will close public comment and go to the approval of the minutes.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes, all of them, December 11th, January 8th, January 10th, January 10th executive meeting, and January 22nd.
Support.
Any discussion?
Yes.
Mr.
I would like to know from the board, when are we gonna implement the new minutes? New style, I should say.
Well, we kind of did a little bit, but feel free to go through the minutes. Let's look at them this next time and just see if there's more that we want to eliminate.
Well,
All right?
can I say something,
Absolutely.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
The minutes shouldn't be more than 2 pages, period. So we don't come back and have a discussion about the number of pages again. So the minutes shouldn't be greater than 2 pages.
Let's you and I sit down after Miss Lane drafts the next minutes and just see what you think we can cut.
Okay,
All right?
yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Massey. Anything else on the minutes? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The consent agenda items we approved. Moving to operational issues. Item A. And there was no change in the agenda, so if I'm using the agenda right from Tuesday, I'm okay? Okay. No, I just have my notes on Tuesday, so I just want to make sure I'm... Yep, right, that more. So under operational issues, item A, the board will consider a motion to approve an ordinance to amend the Grand Blanc Township Water System capital fee and usage charges as stated below. And I'm sure these will be published, but they're part of our minutes, so.
That's a move.
You move, Mr. Massey? Is there support?
Support. Will you do a roll call if it comes to that?
Sure.
Thank you.
Any discussion? We talked through this pretty thoroughly on Tuesday, that and the pass-through costs, what have you. So, Ms. Lane? Go
Mr.
ahead.
Massey,
Yes.
myself, yes. Mr. Gruzak,
Yes.
Mr. Atkins,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas,
Yes.
Mr. Mansell,
Yes.
Mr. Supervisor.
Yes. Item B, the board will consider a motion directing the superintendent, Attorney Laddie, and finance director Sostak to prepare documents and a board resolution authorizing a loan from DPW funds to the DDA in the amount of $200,000 to include term length and interest rate. The resolution will come back to the board February 26, 2019.
That's so move.
Okay?
Support.
Motion and supported. Any discussion? Mr. Atkins?
So just to be clear, so we're supporting to have this drafted, and then when it comes back to the board in the form of resolution, will the interest rate and the length, all that will be already established, and that's what we'll.
Well, I'll propose an interest rate for you to consider, and then you'll be able to debate that before you adopt the resolution.
All right, thanks.
Okay. And it's not a resolution right now, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item C, the board will consider a motion to approve the Genesee County Road Commission proposal to install a traffic signal at the intersection of Grand Blanc and Embry for $24,070 and authorize township supervisor to execute the local road agreement.
So moved, Mr.
Support.
Okay? And we had quite a bit of discussion on this on Tuesday, and I'm sure Mr. Sears will
Supervisor.
communicate our concerns with getting maybe Mr. Mansour, what did you call it?
A simulation.
A simulation of the intersection, how that would work. Maybe both the light and a roundabout,
Yeah.
and timing with
With
timing with Dort and Grand Blanc as
exactly.
well,
Yes, exactly.
how that would interact.
I had one additional item here is that
Sure.
in the Genesee County Road Commission proposal, they called it to install a temporary traffic signal.
Right.
So I would like to have that descriptor put into the motion as well.
Part of the motion.
Accepted.
Okay. Those accepted. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, item D, the board will discuss the response to the resolution requesting feedback from the city and schools regarding shared concerns and changes needed to the joint agreement for parks and recreation operations to address liability concerns. So we had quite a lengthy discussion on Tuesday with regard to this issue. Mr. Laddie and Mr. Limita had a meeting today, and
We did,
Would you
and then
Go ahead.
also we're gonna work on it a bit tomorrow as well, and then we're gonna, pursuant to particularly I think Mr. Mansour's comment, we're gonna put together a proposal for you to consider, for us to send to them, so they'll actually have a proposed document to consider, and we'll continue with our discussions.
okay. The discussion went well today, Mr. Limita. Anything you wanted to bring up, or you want to wait till your...
No, just so the board knows, I mean, I think it was a very productive discussion. We were there for a couple of hours. Parks and Rec Director Kay Edson, the Assistant Director Jamie Weasel, and then Office Manager Carol Newman were in attendance along with David and I. And we started off by asking what their concerns were with where we were so far in the process, and I think that opened it up. And understandably, it's more about, you know, do they have jobs? What does this look like? How do we move forward? But in the end, all of them understood the board's concern about liability. They said that they understood that of all the options available, that they agreed that the township becoming the employer of record made the most sense of any of the proposals. So I would say it was very well received. We were able to answer some of their questions. Some of them I couldn't answer, obviously, because there's a question mark until we work through what it looks like. But I was very happy with the outcome. We agreed to do some follow-up. I think one of the things the board needs to be aware of is the senior center operations run through Parks and Recreation. So we had quite a bit of discussion on that. Assistant Director Jamie Weasel is going to go through and put some information, crunch some numbers for it, because they get like $170,000 in the county millage. Then we've always done CDBG funds to the tune of about $45,000 a year from both the township and the city combined to help offset the senior director's salary. But But Parks and Rec does plow their parking lot, and they do some minor maintenance for them and things like that. So we asked them to get as close as possible so that you guys will have the ability to make some decisions about that. We threw out a lot of ideas. Maybe the city takes over the senior center, or maybe they stay with Parks and Rec if they become employer of record and it comes in here. So I think there's options. We just need to vet it more, and then we'll provide those for the board for you guys to be able to make an informed decision on how you want to move forward.
I'm very pleased that it went well.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Massey.
I'd like to bring to the board's attention that I think for the best interest of this board and the new chairperson, whoever that person will be over the Parks and Rec.
Okay, Parks Director.
Yes. So I think we need to have an audit of the outgoing chair, whatever you want to call it. You can call it a forensic audit. You can call it a regular audit. But we need to set the tone that the new chair of Parks and Rec will not be taking on a additional mishap, something we learned later that was in the past, and now we want to blame the current chair for what the previous chair had done.
I'm familiar with organizations doing that, Mr. Massey, where there's, for example, if we were to get a new superintendent or a new finance director or what have you, we want to make sure they start out with clean slate, what have you. Mr. Lehman has a response, I believe.
I think one of the things that might help Trustee Massey is that we had a considerable conversation today about their accounts payable, their receipting, what that might look like, how it will work, and I just want you to understand that when they come on board with us, if that's the route that we go, and it certainly looks that way, we will continue to run, if you think about your budget now, we run Parks and Recreation as a special revenue fund.
Yes.
And because they have a variety of different revenue accounts, it fits within the uniform chart of accounts. It's not hard for us to move in. Will we be doing things somewhat differently than what they do now? Absolutely. So it's going to require some time to work through the finance department on making sure that we've got all the appropriate line items set up and make sure that we're properly accounting for and receipting everything that comes in. They are audited every year. We have audited numbers through every year, so I'm not generally concerned more of a forensic audit if we thought something was missing or there was something awry. I don't think we feel that way at this point. I think it would be uncovered as we started to pull their information together and we set up our new department within the uniform chart of accounts. We are going to account for all of the different programs, the receipting in, the expenditures. And I think once you see that, kind of like the way we structure a budget for any other department, I think it will give you a much better sense of at least feeling that we have a better handle on what they've been doing and what they're going to be doing moving forward.
Yes, but let me say this. I know this for a fact. This is not guesswork. If someone knows accounting inside and out, okay, all they have to do is make sure that the accounting process is what you call balanced, okay? If everything balanced done during our audit doesn't reveal fraudulent activities in most cases, unless someone doesn't know how to balance the books correctly. Now, you can ask any auditor that, and they will stand by what I'm saying. So I'm concerned that let me put it on the table. If there were some fraudulent activity, a regular audit wouldn't normally pick that up. Now, that's the accounting practice. I didn't make that up.
Mr. Mansur and then Mr. Thomas.
Supervisor Bennett, I agree with Trustee Massey that we should have an audit, and it should include not just the P&L like we're used to seeing in our normal budgeting activity, but also do a cash flow and a balance statement, because that would certainly give the opportunity to uncover if there was any liabilities outstanding.
Mr. Thomas and then Mr. Atkins.
Just a couple things on this. Through you to Trustee Massey, when you started speaking of the unknown liabilities.
Can you pull the microphone down? 'Cause I know
Do you want me to turn it on?
please.
Yeah.
Because when, just let me make a note, if anybody watches our video, if somebody's not speaking into the mic, Nicole has to turn up the reception so loud that then it starts to give some noise on the tape, so I
Okay.
appreciate it.
Through you to, I had it on.
Okay.
This time. Through you to Trustee Massey, when you're speaking of the unforeseen liabilities that came up, you're referring to when this township took on the $13,500
No,
to catch up on the health insurance payments, and we went to the city and they didn't want to help out, so we paid the whole thing.
no, I'm not speaking of it. I'm just speaking, it should be the practice when an outgoing leader, would it be a supervisor or the superintendent, that should be an audit.
You know, it's interesting because that 13,500 or that 13,000 and change. When I went through the audit again. Superintendent Limita sent it out to us, I think this morning or so, or last night, or the day before. And I was trying to find that 13,500 where it would show that we were behind in it. I was looking through the P&Ls from last year, and I couldn't find it. And I was going to ask, that's what my segue to my question was asking that, but.
Well, I think that some of that might
I
have
wanted
been
to-
cleared up too, I don't know, Mr.
Well, we
Massey.
cleared it out. We
Well-
paid it.
Wasn't there some kind of communication or something
Yes.
today that said that,
What happened is ironic, I can't believe this. It
Okay.
appears at the meeting on Tuesday that everybody was surprised, even though all the people's in the audience were surprised that I mentioned the 15,000. It looks as though that I was standing alone by myself. Then I received some information today that the Parks and Rec director admitted, yes, we are in the red, $14,999.
$9.99.
Now, what a coincidence. $1 difference. Does that sound like a coincidence, or does it sound like facts?
Well,
Mr. let's,
when I through,
go ahead,
I
Mr.
have
Thomas.
two questions. Trustee Massey, when Wednesday morning after our long meeting on Tuesday, I spoke with Director Edson
Yes.
and trying to figure it out myself. I didn't receive the packet from the last meeting, but then Director Edson said she didn't. When our first conversation, she didn't understand where you were coming from, and then later in the afternoon, she called me, and then she put it in an email to me, and then I emailed it out to everybody.
Okay.
But through you to Superintendent Limita, is this how we are?
Sometimes.
Superintendent Limita, can you help me and see where I would look for that 13.5?
So when
I
they
need
do
to be
the audit,
educated when I
that
look.
13.5 would have been in an accounts payable, right? That they had accounts payable out there. And it depends. You got to remember when the auditors come in March, typically on a calendar year audit, they're going to come back.
I
and look.
understand that, but
And if
we're
they pushed it through in January, if they paid it in January,
It'll show
and
up.
it was December due, then it still gets picked up on that year. So there's nothing in the accounts payable that was left over as long as it was taken care of within that first 3 months of.
But I couldn't find it in the P&L statement.
Again, we don't have
I
anything
know.
to do with
I was
it.
wondering if you'd educate
But
me
all I
on
can
that.
tell you is that if you're looking for it at their year-end audit and why it wouldn't have been picked up in the audit, because certainly if they were doing that, if it was short after year and it's showing up in accounts payable, the auditors would have commented on it.
How
They
many,
would have-
how many
they would
years
have-
was it short, Superintendent Limita? 3? Was it 3 or 2?
How many years?
Yeah, how many years has it been outstanding that 13.5?
Oh,
Couple?
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
Because, and then my last thing is I agree with Trustee Massey. on doing the, I'm serious, going through it, and I can't find it on the P&L. Yeah, I can't find it on the cash flow. I couldn't find it in this year's audit, and 17's audit, and 16's audit. I totally agree with Trustee Massey and Trustee Mansour.
Mr. Atkins?
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat with that. I just don't feel, it's just like doing an acquisition of a company, right? You have to know where you stand. Numbers on paper don't mean a whole lot. I think we really need to look at reconciling assets as well as financial audit. A lot of things get brought up that you don't know the details on, and you may never find. We've talked about insurance policies and stuff like that we've uncovered with fire and some of these other outside arrangements. So I think those, if we're looking at being the employer on record, I think it's just fair that we know every single thing that's going on, right down to the last dollar, as well as the assets, where they're at, how they're managed, how they're tagged.
That's a great point on the assets.
I'm not an accountant, and maybe Mr. Lemata or Mr. Laddie or one of our board members can help me with this, but there's a few different levels or types of audits. Am I not mistaken? There's some testing that can be done. I'm familiar a little bit with some forensic audits, but forensic audits, sometimes they go in and test a few things to see how they come out, and if they don't come out well, then they go a little bit deeper in that area, and doesn't go so well, they go a little bit deeper, and so I'm not sure, but I'm certainly open to looking at that, and I'm familiar in that when I've taken over certain positions, I've requested an audit just so that I'm not absorbing the past sins of whether they're mistakes or fraud. I didn't want to absorb those mistakes or fraud and have it on my record.
And we would do that to Superintendent Lemata, because he would be...
Yeah, and I think, it's only fair for Mr. Lemata that if we're taking on another entity and absorbing their assets, everything else, I want to make sure that we aren't picking up some things. We've found some things already that we weren't aware of, things like maybe the OPEB not being reported to the state. They
was reported.
we had to file a corrective action plan. I'm not sure, how well theirs are funded, but Mr. Lemata?
When you guys think about doing an audit, like a forensic audit, we're looking for criminal behavior or something. There's no sense of doing two audits. When we do that year-end audit, we'll have either the audit firm they've been using, Yo and Yo, or we use Plant Moran, or we use somebody else. Tell them specifically what we're looking for. The other thing you're going to have to do is order an actuarial on that OPEB. And one of the reasons that you have to do that is because the Yo and Yo is showing actuarial results in the audit of $115,000 or $118,000. But that's not, we have to have a true cost. It's kind of like when you look at the fire department's year-end audit from Yo and Yo, it's not an actual actuarial that they did. They're saying based on what they see, they're projecting that it's $300,000 or whatever it was, $367,000. But hot off the press today, we finally got our actuarial evaluation in just late this afternoon, and they've got the fire, which we had them do, accrued actuarial liabilities to be $791,946. So it's a difference between having a true actuarial done versus having the auditors do projections on where they think the OPEB is. So you're going to have to do that anyways, because depending on how that rolls forward, you'll do the audit. You can do more complete. You can ask them to do what you guys want to have done. But then we also should order that actuarial relatively soon so that we have a much better feeling in today's dollars as we take it over, because our partners are going to have to pony up to
a third.
If we're going to assume all that liability, our other partners already own 33 and a third of it. They need to pay. Maybe it's not 118,000. Maybe it's 300,000 or 400,000, or I don't know until we get the actuarial done based in today's dollars, and then they'll have to provide that value to us to take on that liability.
Mr. Thomas, then Mr. Massey.
Through you to Superintendent Limita, with, I mentioned this on Tuesday, that there has never been an actuarial, and I requested one for this year, but that was denied through the Parks and Rec Commission. But in the new agreement, if the new agreement, the city's gonna have to pay for a third, the schools are responsible for a third, and we're responsible for the third for the OPEB. And Trustee Atkins brought up an excellent point, is that we're gonna have to do a serious assets, because some of this stuff was purchased, the equipment was purchased wholly by us. Some of it was bought by the commission, and I'm not sure how that'll shake out, where the commission owns the property, and yet the township, the schools, and the city would still, I'm not sure how any of that would shake out.
Mr. Limina?
So that asset valuation, I mean, primarily, they don't own an incredible, they don't own a lot of equipment, right? They're carrying in their books what they're carrying on as their fixed assets. And then what it is, as we clean it up, we want to make sure that there's no duplication, that we're carrying something, they're carrying something. I mean, we know what we paid for and we're carrying it, right? So there's no question about what the township purchased, because we have it in our fixed asset allocation. If we just want to make sure when we do the audit of theirs, that we look to make sure that they're not carrying something that we're also carrying, because they don't have that ability to carry that as an asset if we purchased it wholly.
Correct.
So like
Right.
that last piece of equipment, we purchased that. We want to make sure that that's not somewhere that their auditor didn't pick that up and put it in as their fixed assets.
Well, for example,
that just would have to be taken out.
for example, one of the piece of product or the equipment is when they went out and the commission went out and had their own loan, and we're not responsible for the loan, city isn't, the school isn't, and they purchased that $80,000 piece of equipment. But you really got to walk me through this, because when you have, they took the loan and they repaid the loan, but they repaid the loan with monies that from the city, the school, and the township. So, I mean, if it wasn't for the city, the school, and the township, how did they generate the funds to pay back the loan?
Well, and again, remember our contribution, the only monetary funds that we generate are through the contribution from the city and township, and it's a very minor part of their overall funding.
But if it wasn't for our park, then they couldn't generate the funds.
I mean, but the school, gyms, the pool, I mean,
Exactly.
It depends on where,
Yep.
I mean, it depends on how far you want to try to figure out, well, did that money come from the school's basketball program use, or did that come from the ball fields? I don't think we have to get that granular with it, although it's going to be a David Laddie question, because depending on what it says in the agreement about the dissolution of it and what happens with any fixed assets that they own. We're not talking a high dollar here. I mean, it's not like they're sitting on $2 million worth of fixed assets. It's, they might be carrying a couple $100,000 worth of fixed assets. It's not a tremendous amount, because we've always owned everything, and they'd use other stuff. So it's a smaller amount. I'm not, but again, it's a David Laddie question, because he's the one would have to go through whatever their dissolution was in there and how it speaks to assets, if it speaks to assets in the 1970 agreement.
When we were doing assets, talking about how we're going to label and our assets through Director Zostak, I believe, did she start on the Parks and Rec equipment? I don't want to duplicate work.
Well, it's not ours yet.
No, we haven't done Parks and Recreation. I mean, we know what we're carrying from fixed assets on Parks and Recreation. Anything that we purchased wholly, we have in our books, if it hasn't already been depreciated down to zero.
And then my last question to you, Superintendent Limita, I'm sorry, it's been a long day, is that the four of us, the four trustees, have said that we'd like to see a deep dive type of, maybe not per se a forensic audit, and what you're I think what we're looking for is something deeper than a regular audit. What do you suggest?
I mean, they'll do whatever you want to do specifically, especially if you're coming in to do. Number one, we have to give them notice if we follow the agreement and the joint ordinance as it stands now. We're giving them notice, and it was supposed to be a year. So I mean, it depends on how this thing rolls out. It could take us 2 years to get out of this agreement, depending on how you interpret what it said in there, or maybe it'll be on January 1st, 2020 that this is enough notice. If we gave it now, we move it forward. But we're going to have to notice the schools and the city that we intend to drop out, and as any one of the partners has the ability to do that, then it takes, and again, the language, David, was like 1 year.
Yeah,
you know.
But,
If
by the
they
way,
want-
Hold on just a minute, let Mr. Laddie.
well, I'm again, we're exploring right now the transition from of identifying us as the employer of record. We have an outgoing director, and there was some interest in using that marker in time to figure out exactly to get a good handle on not just the ordinary audit, but also a sort of deeper look into the operations financially. There also could be an accounting of assets, but we're not talking about dissolution, right? You want that because of the recognition that we're employer of record and also outgoing director Edson. Am I correct about that? I mean, we're
Right.
not,
Well,
okay.
yeah, it all depends on how we write up the proposed agreement, I guess, you know, and in that proposed agreement, we may propose that we start it immediately.
But you might want that financial information now. If
Right.
the agreement stayed the same, you might want it, right? I mean, it's triggered because of the transition of your longtime director, and also the desire to have a better or different look at the financial day-to-day operations or month-to-month operations. Is that?
Well, my thought is, Mr. Laddie, that if we're taking over employer of record, receivables, payables, we're essentially pretty much taking over the organization, and that's where, you know, we absorb the liability. Mr. Atkin, you got your hand up, I think.
Schools or city
Yeah,
necessarily.
we're not. I mean, but that's all just in this administrative changeover, right? As employer of record.
Perhaps.
Or am I missing something?
Well, two questions. One is, you know, I hate using the term agreements anymore because they're selectively followed. So, and I've asked you this before, Mr. Laddie, I don't believe there are any agreements. And when we say, you know, we hone in on certain things of the agreement that sounds good, like, well, it takes 1 year to get out of this agreement. Well, when did the year start? 1972, when people didn't follow sentence number 1? Or so I don't think there's really anything in the agreement that anybody can hold anybody to, in my opinion. And then secondly, for the asset part of it, you know, to Supervisor Bennett's comment, you know, taking all this on, regardless what it's going to look like in the end or how it's going to be negotiated, you know, touching, seeing, understanding what the assets are. Sometimes maybe an asset, you know, wore out, it served its purpose, maybe it was, you know, sent to the junkyard or whatever, and maybe it wasn't accounted for properly, and you think you're getting, you know, 10 lawnmowers, maybe you're getting 5, but I think seeing them, touching them, knowing they exist, understanding what that current value is important, especially as we look really to make Bicentennial a premier park and make sure we're getting the equipment that we want and need as part of this.
So a lot of this, it depends on, you know, we're going to meet and write up proposed agreement, and you know, in that proposed agreement, I think there will probably be some sort of timeline as far as when some of this would occur that we would propose to the city and to the schools. You know?
Well, what it would occur would be the first thing that has to occur is the transition to us as employer of record.
Right.
And then if there are other things that are going to occur, and I by the way, that's not the only topic that we'll be exploring as far as renegotiating the agreement, but that's the primary issue that we're dealing with now. But I'm seeing this accounting as being something in addition, or
Just a small one.
just it could let's say there were no changes to the agreement. You might want that now,
Absolutely.
independent of whatever the course is of our partnership with Parks and Rec. Is
Right.
that a fair statement?
I think so.
Yes,
Mr.
absolutely.
Mansour had his hand up down here.
Yeah. So, I mean, it looks like we're pretty much agreed on the need for an audit of adequate depth to really enable us to exercise our due diligence here, and we have to accompany that probably with some kind of a physical inventory, so that we can document everything we have and maybe pictures or whatever. So, I mean, as I listen to people, that's kind of what I hear that we're kind of narrowing in on. So, I would certainly be supportive of that. The other thing that I think I guess I'd like to hear back is that when we did our resolution to the city and the schools, I think we gave them a time frame. We expected some kind of a response, and I'd like to know. I think that time frame has come and gone, and I'd like to know if we have some responsive record that we can.
Well, I was contacted by the schools. We exchanged emails. The schools says we're ready, willing, and able to discuss amendments to that agreement. We all received the correspondence from Attorney Griffin, and in addition to that, I talked to Attorney Griffin yesterday, and they're ready to discuss the issues as well. So I believe they may have not been within our 7-day time frame of when they were able to meet and discuss, but I think that for all practical purposes, they responded and they said, let's hear what you have to say.
Sure. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr.
I
Massey.
have one thing that, listening to the superintendent and the attorney talk about what they're taking a deep dive into, there's a concern, I think. Is it important for us to know how the commission was able to purchase certain assets?
I don't see that as being of primary importance for us. It's interesting though, how again, not a juristic entity or standalone entity could borrow money, could be subject to warranties and things like that. But I find that I don't find that to be at this point in time necessarily a pressing issue. I find it only an interesting topic. But again, with what you just described as far as the financial information you want, I think that it's going to lead us on at least from a curiosity standpoint, it'll be interesting.
Here's what I'm thinking. My thoughts are like this. If they were able to pull that off based on our business knowledge, okay? Let me say based on my business knowledge. They probably have gone out, this is, I'm theoretically thinking here. They could have gone out and borrowed money against the current assets, and we would have no way of knowing it.
Or set up bank accounts.
But you would, because we've had a township representative, a township board member has been on the Parks and Rec Commission.
But we don't know how those were set up though.
But it was,
You would not know.
they would have had to approve it, and it would have also been carried, I mean, in the books, you would have seen loan payments.
Nope.
I mean,
Well,
there's-
except that if I go out to a bank and get a loan, they're gonna ask me, I need to see who the board members are. Maybe.
We didn't know.
You could set up a bank account, I mean, if you can, I mean,
It
There's
was never
some
brought to
concern
the
there.
commission, the Parks and Rec Commission, that we were $13,500 running negative for 2 years. That was never brought up one time. The only reason why I found out was because you told me.
But you did see the check register every month at the meetings of what went out, what came in, what went out, what they were writing. I mean, were they making any loan payments?
Every once in a while, I would sign them until David told me not to.
But were they making any loan payments? Like you would have seen a loan payment to...
It's like looking at our check register, Superintendent Lehman. There's no way that you'd be able to pick something out like that. Seriously. There's a couple 100, 300 checks a month.
well, we have a couple of individuals that look at that and sign, there's 3 different people that sign off on it at a minimum.
And it would show...
And we have Al.
And it would show in liabilities in the annual audit.
Well, one thing though that is concerning to me, and I'd like to, I don't know if I ask Attorney Laddie or Superintendent Limita this question, or to find out the answer. And the response to Attorney Griffin, in his response to us, and we're concerned about liability. And when he sent his response back, he never brought up anything about liability. He was concerned about payments to the commission, and he was concerned about a 1975 mimeographed IRS. My concern is, did the city go from the 40% that's in the agreement, that Lonnie brings up, the agreement that really isn't an agreement? Trustee Atkins brings up the agreement that's not an agreement. And in the agreement it says 60-40. Has the city stopped paying the 40%? And are they down to the 16% like they said that they were going to do?
I can't tell you what as far as the money goes, what they're concerned about.
No, that's why I'm asking is which one of you could find out for us.
Nothing's changed. That was a proposal. They looked at the Parks and Rec Commission proposal and they responded back to that. But as far as operationally, nothing's changed at this time from Parks and Recreation.
Yeah, I would agree, Mr. Thomas. The letter really didn't concern itself too much on liability, and it sounds like they're willing to listen, but I'm not sure they've expressed any concern.
Well, my
Doesn't sound like-
prediction on the liability, as far as us being employer of record, is they're going to concur with that. That's my prediction.
Okay.
And,
And we were going to have a fire department.
Easy button.
well, I think, well, but then the next question becomes, again, that change in financing came from the city based on the proposed amendments from the Parks and Rec Commission. And so we haven't even addressed that, and
We're not talking about, but my quandary is that when we sent out our proposal, that like Supervisor Bennett eloquently said, is that we're concerned about liabilities, and we asked a question about liabilities, but yet they go from a 40% match to this is their response. We're worried about liabilities and unfunded OPEB, and their response is they can borrow up to $50,000 on their own, and they only have to pay. And by the way, we're only going to pay you 16%. Is that right, Superintendent? Supervisor Bennett?
Well, we
go ahead,
asked
Mr.
them,
Lay.
in our resolution, we asked them to respond to us in the affirmative that they're willing to renegotiate the existing agreement.
They did.
And they wrote back,
It's 16%.
because we're primarily concerned about employment liability, and rather than just saying we're willing to do that, they said we're unconvinced as far as the employment liability goes, and oh, by the way, as for your other proposed amendments, here's X, Y, and Z, and those weren't our proposed amendments. All they needed to do was say, yes, let's begin this discussion, and we'd be able to carry on. I consider their other responses regarding the financing, regarding the ability to borrow money, they're non-responsive to our request. We're getting a good idea of where they're headed, but we haven't even, as far as I'm concerned, the parties haven't begun to negotiate that. They just skipped ahead because they thought that Parks and Rec language was ours, frankly.
I just have a real issue with talking about liability and us taking over the Parks and Rec. I better said Superintendent Lima taking over the responsibilities of Parks and Rec. And their response is, well, since you asked this, we're going to cut your funding in half.
That's what they said, but
I don't want to play the fire game.
We're gonna put together a proposal. We're gonna meet, put together a proposal, and this board will have a chance to look at that before it goes anywhere.
And Trustee Massey had a good point. Let's put our thoughts down on paper and ship it over to them.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
So,
one thing,
go ahead.
let me say, if I understood the attorney correctly, let me break it down in simple terms. If I'm wrong, you correct me. If you send me a direct order, I can choose to respond in any way I want to. But if I don't respond directly as you asked me to, it doesn't mean anything, if I understood you correctly.
Yeah, we wanted to open up a dialogue, and they jumped 10 steps ahead.
Yes, yes, that's what
But I'm not gonna hold them to that.
yes.
Mr. Atkins?
I do have a concern of mine at this point is, you know, we did the right thing by asking them to hold off on filling the position of the director for the time being. They cooperated with that, and I think what we also should be looking at is somehow making sure that they don't, you know, again, I like to say, you know, you're freezing things in time. You know, when you purchase a company, you know, that company doesn't go and make a bunch of promises or give a bunch of big raises or take out big loans. So if the commission has the ability still, or they're under the impression they have the ability to sign for things or of that nature, you know, we want to make sure that the transition between the current director and someone else, that they're not business as usual. Maybe spring's coming, maybe they take on some liability. How do you stop that from going forward?
Again, I'm not a policymaker, but I'm sitting here thinking about one thing, and that is that we need to, as soon as we can, be recognized as the employer of record, take responsibility for the employment issues. It's my hope and expectation that programming as proposed for Parks and Rec in 2019 carries on just like it's planned and just like it did in 2018, and maybe even better. I'm not considering necessarily that being recognized as the employer of record is going to stop programming. It's going to stop, you know, maintenance of lawnmowers. It's going to stop schedules of things like that. And I don't think you guys feel that way either, right? And so it isn't like we're going to wholesale take over this operation and plan and program and get these programs up. We're going to use a lot of the operation, in my opinion, is still going to be in place as far as Parks and Rec is concerned. We're just going to transition the employment responsibilities over, among other things that we're going to talk about and send in that agreement. But I'm thinking you want Parks and Rec, considering it's mid-February, to carry on with their planned programs for the summer of 2019, and it's not going to be necessarily taken over by Dennis. Am I... Do I have that?
Well, that wasn't my question. If I could, so my question was not to do with any of the programming, any of that. It was, how do we make sure that while we're in negotiations or drawing up a new agreement, just like we asked them to not officially fill the director spot, how do we prevent them from taking on loans or signing for things like they have historically done or believe they can do? How do we put the brakes on that?
Well, what we could do is whatever we decide to send them, and it'll be coming up very quickly, starting with tomorrow morning with a rough framework. We can put a cover letter on it saying during these negotiations, or we can send a cover letter in advance saying you're going to get a proposed agreement from us. Let's not have any contractual obligations from the Parks and Rec Commission while we're in this transition. Let's not have any major capital purchases. And by the way, capital purchases were in our resolution. They're in there. And so we can say to them, we want you to continue with business as usual and what's planned in the future, but don't obligate anybody to anything during this discussion period. Is that?
Absolutely. Thanks.
But
Mr. Buzak?
Yeah, because that's what I thought. I heard that, you can't hire anybody because you can do a temporary, and then also you can't spend any money. You can't get any loans. You can just operate normal, but anything that you have, you got to come back to us, and if you want to spend it, then we'll tell you again.
Well,
That's what I thought.
They signed 7 employment agreements in the meantime, though.
yeah, this is my issue.
Yes.
This is my absolute issue because we wrote that resolution and we used hard language. We didn't spell it out and say, listen, if you do break this, then we're going to turn in our 1-year notice because it's the liability and we're responsible for our residents to keep them safe from the liability. Now, so we wrote that resolution, and then the next day, Superintendent Limita and Supervisor Bennett went to them, went to their commission, met with the chairman, then met with the commission, and they were told, no, we're going to hire the person anyways. And what we'll do is, well, we're still going to hire the person, and we'll just give you one more week. So I don't think they're getting the message, Attorney Laddie. And just like Supervisor Bennett said, they just offered 7 employees contracts in the last, week? Did they do that last week? Trustee Atkins?
I don't know where they stand with that right now, but that was discussed and
It's
was
in the,
part of the
pack-
agreement that they were going to do, yes.
Somewhere I read that.
It's
they
in the
signed-
packet.
How can
They
they sign
signed
them? How can they do that? I thought we told
They
them
did
to
it.
stop. I know.
They
I know,
voted on
they
it
do
last
everything
week.
wrong, but I
Mr.
thought
Limita.
we-
But they can't.
They didn't
Yes, they
hire
can.
new people though, right? I mean, it was
Right.
just,
It
Just
doesn't
sign
matter.
it.
Did they offer them a
Hold
contract?
Hold on a minute.
Yeah.
Let
Contract
Mr.
raises.
Limita speak, please.
but we told them that we wanted their employees to have agreements like a year or 2 years ago, like, hey, these people should have agreements so we know on paper what you'd offered them. I'm surprised that they didn't have it already done, or maybe they did and they were renewing, or maybe these are new. I don't have any idea. You were on the
These are
committee,
new.
so,
Right, but they
These
you
are,
can
so we
speak
asked
to
them
it.
not
Just a
to,
second, Mr.
But-
Just a second, Mr. Thomas.
But I want to get to the point about, like, these guys haven't been running around getting loans and buying stuff. I mean, I know you guys are concerned, but I can probably walk through and touch their physical assets in about 30 minutes. I mean, this isn't a humongous operation here. They have some office equipment. They have some uniforms. They've got some trophies and tiaras left over. I mean, you can go out in the barn. You guys were all in there. You saw what they had. I mean, other than the stuff we bought when we started getting the millage funds in and we upgraded some new equipment, most of the stuff that was left has long been depreciated and has a zero value left. I mean, literally, I think we can do a complete inventory in less than an hour. And yeah, I understand that they've gotten loans in the past, but nothing since
Right.
that I'm aware of since I've been here. I mean, it's not,
And they're
I
still
think that
paying
if we
those
send
loans.
them or have the attorney send something saying we want a moratorium on any new capital purchases, we control the capital funds. This board controls the capital funds that they have. These guys are on a shoestring budget. They struggle to make their bills, especially in the slow time until the registrations start coming in. I think over the next few months we can control it with just a request
Yeah.
for a moratorium.
Well, let us take these things into account when we put together this agreement. I think one of the things too is hiring new employees. I know they've got to hire a bunch of temporary people for the summer or whatever, but I think we want to make sure that somehow HR if we're going to become the employer of record, we need to be involved in the whole process, because that's a huge potential can of worms right there in itself. But hiring any new staff people that would be intended to be permanent, I think, would be a part of that list of things we want to hold off on too, because we don't want, if we take on some employees, let's take a look at who's there now first. Mr. Thomas?
I just want to get a consensus from our board that obviously our last resolution meant absolutely nothing to them, and especially when they disrespected my leader, Supervisor Bennett, and disrespected Trustee Atkins and Superintendent Limita, and still went out and planned on doing what they were doing. We asked them not to hire anybody. We asked them not to. That not only did they extend the 7 contracts and give them out, but they gave them raises after we just bailed them out at $13,500. And I'm trying not to get emotional about it, but
So what's
Yeah.
the consensus that you want?
a little bit harder language. Help me out here,
More specific, I guess.
Supervisor
Yeah,
Bennett.
trying to control
Well,
it.
we've sent a letter to the city and the schools, and that's the real partners in this thing.
Well, what's
I
the
think
meat behind
I think at our meeting on Tuesday we had, it looked like, I don't know if all the board was here from the parks, but most of it was here, I would guess, for the Parks Commission. So they heard our concerns. I think, I don't know about this year thing or 2 years notice and whatever. I tend to believe that we'll write up a proposed agreement, and in that will be a time frame, but I see it to be much shorter, that I mean, the employer of record thing, our concerns are like immediate, so I don't see that taking a while to take place. But I think as far as language, I think Mr. Laddie hit the nail on the head. We can send a cover letter that to the other entities and include the Parks Commission in that letter, telling them that this is our position. I'm not sure, as far as giving them an ultimatum that if this isn't followed, I don't know what your feelings are on that, Mr. Laddie, but if these are the things we don't want them to do, what?
I think we find ourselves, primarily because of the time of the year, we're in a delicate discussion, in my opinion. The old agreement, for all of its flaws and its age and whether or not it's been followed to the letter or not, is something that the goal of that dissolution process is to provide a lot of lead time for the other two agencies. I believe we're about to engage in a discussion that's going to radically change that agreement. It's going to bring a lot of the discussion. It's going to bring a lot of insight and operation into the township hall. It isn't necessarily meant to be a takeover of Parks and Rec, but the employment responsibilities are going to lead to a lot of interactive insight and operational ability and oversight on our part. I don't necessarily think you want to. I think we should let this play out. We should encourage them to carry on with their programming. We should encourage them to consider what sort of staffing needs and what sort of financing they need to put the programs on. And let's see what we can get done with a direct discussion with them, with us starting it off by sending them some proposed language, which we haven't done yet.
I'm willing to give that a shot and see if we can't. It sounds, that what's encouraging is it sounds like the meeting today went well. That our partners are in this project are supportive of evidently what ideas you've been proposing or thoughts. So I'd give it the benefit of the doubt that maybe we're going in the right direction.
If you're comfortable with it, Supervisor Bennett.
Well, from what I'm hearing, I wasn't at the meeting today, but from what I'm hearing from Mr. Lehman and Mr. Laddie, that they felt as though they're receptive towards moving in a direction that answers some of our concerns. Or all of them, I don't know. Mr. Massey?
Mr. Chair, I have a question for attorney. Is it practical for me to say, in some legal instance, when you start a negotiation and the other party overstep its boundary intentionally, that says that, okay, you didn't do this out of goodwill, I guess. You did this out of creating fraudulent activity. That's the only thing I can think of right now.
I think what you're wrestling with is maybe the difference between good faith and bad faith.
Yes,
as far
yes.
as negotiations are concerned.
Yes.
And I don't consider. And again, this is the half-speed action by the Parks and Rec Commission to adjust existing contracts with their employees is something that perhaps, I thought we were pretty clear in our resolution. Mm-hmm. The other thing we're clear about is don't hire a director, and they didn't hire a director. However begrudgingly they arrived at that decision, And again, the initial response from Attorney Griffin, it wasn't responsive necessarily, but I had a follow-up discussion with him, and I think I know that we're not going to have an issue regarding the employment liability. And the fact that somebody maybe jumped the gun and seized on 3 potential ideas from Parks and Rec Commission from an April agreement, that doesn't constitute bad faith to me. That just constitutes maybe they didn't realize. They didn't study our resolution, and they didn't realize the document that they were responding to wasn't ours. I think it was a mistake, frankly.
So I guess what we want to do is move forward with meeting to put together a proposed agreement that will come back to this board to look at.
If you're comfortable with that, Supervisor Bennett, then I am.
But I'm not
I'm
finished
throwing a
yet.
little temper tantrum.
I'm not finished yet, but
okay.
in addition, I think it was mentioned, and it sounded like there's some consensus for a cover letter that Mr. Laddie proposed that would outline the concerns that were brought up
Right.
and address, I think, what you're saying, Mr. Thomas. The only thing that would be missing is any kind of threat of what would happen if they do go down that road and enter into contracts or what have you. But I think they know that we send another letter that we're serious that of these things. You know, one of the things that, I mean, we hold, you know, the bigger hand of cards in this equation, but and I think, you know, so would that satisfy, or would that fit the bill for our board? Do our board members feel comfortable with that direction?
Absolutely.
If you're comfortable with it.
And in the meantime, I think one of the things that we put into that proposed agreement is that, you know, if we're going to take over as employer of record and take over a few other things.
So with this cover letter,
we're going to want an audit as well.
with this cover letter, then they'll go out and buy a new tractor on a handshake deal. Kind of like hiring 7 new people on a contract. Not
I don't think they'll do that.
Well, I don't think so.
Let me say this. Trustee Thomas, frankly speaking, you cannot stop no one from doing whatever they want to.
I know.
It doesn't matter
I
what
know.
you write. You cannot stop anyone from doing whatever he or she chooses to do. So you cannot have a language to stop me, you know.
Well, you're right, Mr. Massey, and I guess, you know, the Parks and Rec, you know, programming has been running well. The one thing that we want to do, you know, is, and I mentioned it Tuesday, that we want to improve on what we have. It isn't as though we want to throw out, you know, the baby with the bathwater. We want to improve what we have, build on what we have. We have a busy season coming up, I would guess, with Parks and Rec. We want to make sure the employees feel that we're going to support the efforts to continue with the programming. However, as I think Mr. Laddie mentioned on Tuesday, that, you know, when somebody asks how is this going to look in the future, well, it's going to mean that the Parks and Rec staff aren't going to have to worry about hiring, firing, OPEB, what have you. We're going to start dealing with those headaches or potential headaches and unraveling a ball of yarn and figuring out which end is up. So I think we want to reassure the staff that the programming we want to continue. It's just all the administrative work that we want to unravel and figure out how we make that work better so that programming isn't affected by that. And that our board feels comfortable with how things are run. And I think that's the bottom line. So I think, you know, we will put together a proposed agreement with the cover letter. The cover letter, I think, if we can send that out, I imagine, through attorney-client privilege and get a feeling from our board if that letter is
Sure.
acceptable.
And that's fine. And by the way, I mean, the letter can go out in advance of our proposed agreement. Tomorrow
Right.
at 9:30, we're gonna start to frame up this agreement. Tomorrow at 10:30, we can
Send a
send you a
letter.
rough draft of the cover letter saying we've begun this process. Here's what we imagined during this process, and I'll have you guys take a look at it. And if there's no objection, I can send it out tomorrow afternoon.
Is that acceptable to everyone? Okay.
Yes.
All right, so we will move forward on that. The next item on the agenda is the board will consider a motion to approve the attorney's recommendation regarding the format for all resolutions of the Township Board.
So move.
Support.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On future positioning, board will discuss any updates from the resolution rescinding the joint fire resolution from the meeting of January 22nd, 2019. As we heard in public comment, that the city council met yesterday and or last night and brought up quite a few issues that I know that some of you want to address. One of the outcomes of that meeting apparently was a letter that was sent to myself and all of our board members and Superintendent Limata.
I thought that was the Valentine's we got.
Well, that wasn't
That was
part of the
what we
Valentine's. But I guess for the public, I can read the letter so that they're aware of it. Dear Sirs and Madam, in 1990, the township and city formed the joint Grand Blanc Fire Department with the goals of providing the Grand Blanc community's superior fire service and a means to work together with each municipality having a voice in the department and to share the costs. At our last city council meeting, Gordon Stryker presented the MGT study. Many questions were asked and the findings were discussed. It was greatly appreciated. Mr. Stryker took time out of his schedule to speak with us. Thereafter, City Council decided to request a joint meeting to be scheduled with Supervisor, Superintendent, Clerk, Treasurer, and Board of Trustees to discuss the MGT report findings and joint department future of the Grand Blanc Fire Department. At our January special meeting, Chief Burdett spoke to the mayor and myself about the importance of bringing these city and township departments back to the table. We hope that you will reconsider discussions as a joint fire department. A joint partnership provides each party input into providing the superior fire service we now enjoy. Please advise whether you wish to participate in a meeting to attempt to provide our differences, or in an attempt to resolve our differences and continue as a joint fire department. Thank you for your time and consideration. Sincerely, Wendy Jean Buer, City Manager. Any comments on the letter, I guess, to begin with? Mr. Mansour?
So I'm kind of wondering about this. We've made communication to, I'm not sure who we addressed it to, but we're getting input on this from various people in the city administration. And so I'd certainly like to know, if this is authorized, if the city attorney's response is authorized, if someone else is authorized. I'd just like to kind of know who we're speaking with in these regards.
Yeah, it's signed by the city manager. Yeah, you're right. In the letter, I don't see where it says that our board has made a motion to request a meeting. But any thoughts on
just a point? Just a point that we need to figure out who it is at the city that we're actually going to be.
Well, let me ask this. Go ahead, Mr. Massey.
Mr. Chair, the way I understand, if I'm correct, I'd like for the attorney to weigh in on this. We have already implemented a resolution.
Yes.
So we have no obligation to respond to this letter. In my opinion, they have an obligation to respond to the resolution.
The resolution is interesting. The resolution is a part of the old agreement that has a clause in it that describes a process in which one of the two founding members can dissolve the fire commission. And we adopted that resolution, and the requirement was that we send notice to them, to the appropriate public officials, within 90 days prior to the effective date, and then we also have to publish that in the paper, which we've done. So we provided notice to Supervisor Bennett, sent notice to Mayor Soderstrom along with a copy of the resolution. I forwarded a copy of the resolution to Mr. Griffin, and we also published a copy of that resolution in the paper. And we got, I've been, by the way, from the beginning since we started this process, my understanding was that Supervisor Limata and I would have discussions with Attorney Griffin. For whatever reason, they chose him. And Attorney Griffin and I think Ms. Wendy Jean Buer attended our first meeting. I've been corresponding with Attorney Griffin regarding some of the issues regarding our proposed agreement to provide them with service. So I've been dealing with Griffin, but as far as the resolution goes, Supervisor Bennett corresponded directly with Mayor Soderstrom. Now it looks to me like, I'm making an assumption that the City Council made a motion for Ms. Jean Buer to reach out to some unknown group of people and ask and invite you as a board to begin negotiations. Where we left it last was, we made and again, Supervisor Bennett made this offer, and I made the offer to Attorney Griffin, that we're ready, willing, and able to provide them service based on the MGT study with the inclusion of the previously unallocated expenses, and also that capital fund, the 6-year capital fund recommended by MGT. I was waiting for a response from them whether they want to have discussion about us providing that service or not. And instead, it looks like you got an invitation to negotiate. From what starting point, I'm not sure. So that's how I've been operating up to this point, and I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, the concern, you know, we sent them I dropped off personally a letter to the mayor that said that we would invite you to take a look at, you know, an offer to provide you service, and that we'd be willing to meet to discuss that. I read in the paper that, you know, and see on the news that, not from me mentioning it, but that we're in negotiations, and I mean, we offered a contract. I don't know, did we spell it? Yeah, we told them how much it would be. It was based on the study.
To the dollar.
Yeah, to the dollar, we told them what it would cost. You know, I guess if they want to counter propose to that 345, I guess that's something they could do, but it isn't something we're necessarily going to accept. We feel that the study was valid and that the dollar amount is valid. Otherwise, we wouldn't have put the offer out there. We would have said it's negotiable, I think, but we didn't say it's negotiable. We said here is the cost that we feel that MGT has determined, and we're moving forward. I guess, you know, if we want to take a step back and start over negotiating, but we've been at that for 3 years now. I mean, it predates this board even, and you know, we can go through the list of reasons why we're at this point. You know, we've got a lot of other things we want to cover besides fire. Mr. Mansour?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to understand what is going on here, I think, but as we discussed on our Tuesday committee of the whole, we had discussion about, you know, we kind of outlined a dollar cost, but why don't we give them a more, you know, thank Miss Jean Buer for her letter and just respond back saying, okay, here's more of the details about what the township's willing to offer the city in terms of continued fire protection. And it's no hard feelings. It's just really kind of business for us. And we have a community. We want to make sure the community is well protected. We have schools. We want to make sure our schools are well protected. So that would be part of our offer. But we're moving forward with a providing service model.
And you bring up a good point, Mr. Mansour, that, you know, I saw one report that, you know, what was the news headline? Something as though tensions are rising or something. There's no tension rising, you know, and it's really, you know, it could be an amicable situation. I mean, we offered them a service for a price, and I don't see what the animosity in that is. If they feel they can do it better and cheaper, God bless them, and let's have a mutual aid agreement if they need it. But if they feel they can do it better, more efficiently, more cost effective, there's no animosity there. We're going to take care of our residents, and they feel they can take care of their residents. Let's continue to work together on the other areas where we have common interests. But I don't have any animosity. I don't know if anybody else. I don't believe this board. And I heard that from what I heard from the meeting last night, that we may have made this decision on an emotional basis. I know Mr. Limita spent an awful lot of time on making sure that this is a fact-based decision, and that everything we do is based on, you know, I don't think we could be any more prepared. Mr. Limita's, you know, we have MGT doing the study on our allocation costs. We have Beckett and Rader and Redstone, which we had in process already looking at space needs for both fire, our township, looking at run times even. Probably the public isn't aware, but we actually been doing a study on run time analysis. That we've looked at the run times from the various fire department buildings, the 2 in the township and the 1 in the city. And actually I can throw up in a minute here on the screen a diagram or a map that highlights what our response times would be given the scenario that we operate out of fire departments 2 and 3. So we couldn't make this any more of a fact-based decision than what we have. And you know, I heard that we blindsided the city. You know, we conduct our business, I believe, to the point, or to, you know, I'm not sure how to phrase this, but everything we do is in public. I mean, and, you know, I didn't know when we were going to decide that it was time to move. But based on the study and on 3 years of studying this, I think it came to a head last month on the 22nd when we had the MGT study, and it confirmed what we had known already for the most part. So, you know, it wasn't our intention to blindside anybody or do anything else. We're just doing what's in the best interest of our residents, based on facts, on audited numbers. So it's really, I agree, Mr. Mansour, this isn't emotional. We want to make sure we provide coverage for the schools and continue to provide the best possible service to our residents.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Massey?
let me speak probably along a different line than Trustee Al Mansour.
Mm-hmm.
And the attorney raised the issue. Now, this letter is addressed to sirs and madam. Now, I don't know who sirs are and madam. You may know. I see this letter as a backdoor trap to undermine the resolution. So I would like for the attorney to weigh in on this. I see no need to respond to this letter at all. There's no need to respond to this letter. Okay? This could have been, if I want to exaggerate further, this could have been written to anybody with in mind with us only in the letter, okay? So if we respond to this letter, we have fallen into their trap. They're not that smart. They can't outsmart us. We set them a resolution, waiting on them to respond. It's left up to the superintendent and the attorney to dialogue with their attorney. We have already put that motion in place. So this letter is a disgrace and degrading us. That's all it's doing. If we respond to it, they have trapped us. I have no reason to see why we should respond to this letter.
Well, and I want to clear up a couple of misconceptions too, Mr. Massey, that I've heard that, you know, number one, I believe a resident and former trustee had written in an editorial that that the township and the city did not meet. And that's true. When Mr. Anderson was on this board, the city refused to meet for a year and said, we have it in writing that they do not want to meet until after the election. And I'm sure Mr. Lehman could outline even more detail of the series of communications that we had. And the Grand Blanc View even actually completed a FOIA request to take a look at the emails to show that. So that was true, and that was disputed, I believe, at the meeting last night that the city had, that wasn't true, and it actually is true. We have met, and you know, for any resident that thinks that we haven't spent time on this board had several joint meetings with the city. We've had numerous conversations and emails back and forth. You know, it behooves me why any of our residents would want us to spend any more time on this issue. I had a resident that I believe I saw a question that they were thinking it's going to cost more for us to operate separately. Actually, it's not going to, I don't believe, going to cost the township any more to operate it. Who it's saving money is the city. And so, yeah, it may cost them more if they go out on their own. All we're simply asking them for is if we'll continue to provide service to the city, but it's not going to be at a subsidized cost. And I also heard, some conversation that, well, we're already paying for our HR department to process payroll. Why wouldn't fire just be included in there at no extra charge? That doesn't work that way in business or government.
You're already delivering the washer, might as well deliver me a free dryer.
Yeah, so there's just a number of issues that I don't know where everybody wants. Is there consensus on what we want to do with this letter, Mr. Atkins and Mr. Thomas?
I completely agree with Trustee Massey. I think that, and Supervisor Bennett on both issues. One is, it's time to turn the page and get on to other things. We have a lot of stuff to work on. I think we've really, collected all the info. Everybody's done their homework. Everybody made a decision based off data. And I agree with Trustee Massey. I don't think that there's anything in this letter that needs a response. I mean, if this letter was true and transparent and good intentions, it would have came out the day after the delivery of the resolution, or the day before, or 4 months ago. So I don't know. I think just like they didn't respond back to the 7-day request we had, or Mr. Laddie set for some things we've asked from their attorney. Not everything needs a response. I'm not sure this one does.
Mr. Thomas?
I just want this board to realize that I am so very, very proud of the way that this board has handled themselves through this, especially proud that Scott, as our Supervisor Bennett, as our supervisor and our leader, that this is the most transparent thing I've ever seen. We never once, not once, went into executive session. You folks realize that? You look at all the other municipalities around the county, and every 5 seconds they're in executive session. I can count on one hand in the last 2 years how many times we went into executive session. I mean, we made it a point with Attorney Laddie and our superintendent, and especially our supervisor, that this was out in the open and transparent. This is not an emotional issue. This is, we were subsidizing the city in the tune of $200,000 and change for the last 20 years, which equates what, $4 million? Yeah, 4? Mm-hmm. So, I was waiting for an answer. So for $4 million, we could have already bought our 3 trucks, folks, but all of us should be aware of how transparent we were in this. Scott, our Supervisor Bennett, actually made it so important that the information was going out to the city, the residents, and anybody that would listen. Scott worked with our videographer and made our YouTube presentation available within 24 hours after our meetings because he wanted the information going out. Our supervisor hand-delivered the resolution to the mayor, hand-delivered it to her staff, and we have nothing to be ashamed about. We did this for our residents to save money, to save time, and most importantly, to save lives. I don't know how many times I have been lectured by Chief Burdett that it's a lot more efficient to go into a traffic-laden, crowded facility, i.e. the city, than it is trying to get out of the city and to our fires. And folks, we're here for our residents and to save lives. And I want to commend you, Supervisor Bennett.
Thank you very much. You've been very kind, Mr. Thomas. Appreciate that very much. But I believe it's been a team effort. You know, that this board has had the patience to go through, you know, 2 years of this issue yourself, you know, and also our superintendent attorney. You know, I think, you know, one of the things that Superintendent Limata put together is this recap. It's basically a timeline of everything that's occurred. I remember from day one of starting as supervisor, Mr. Limata briefing me on this issue, and I think probably within the first week we had a meeting with the city, the mayor and the city manager and talked about this issue. In fact, we had breakfast and outlined the agenda for the first joint meeting that we were going to have. So we've tried, and it's been a team effort, and I concur that this has been completely out in the open. You know, if somebody was blindsided, then they really weren't paying attention to what we were doing month by month, because this, I think it's probably been on the agenda every month since this board was sworn in. So I don't know if there's anything that we want to go through on this timeline. I think it's more for everybody's use and knowledge. Mr. Limata, is there anything on this timeline that we want to cover or that you want to go over?
I just gave it as a resource, especially to Trustee Atkins, who joined us later than some of you, but it really does predate this board. You know, it started early 2016 when we started having the conversation, when we first uncovered that there was a critical shortfall in capital funding, and I just really wanted everyone to have it as a reference that just reminds you that we really have worked hard jointly with fire task forces, with full board and full city council. You know, it really didn't break down until you know, we had put them on notice that all through this process that we couldn't wait any longer and that we need to get our millage funds out there. And as you guys are aware, I mean, they actively recruited against our millage funds for some reason that remains, you know, escapes me. And I think that may have been kind of the beginning of the end of our ability to continue to work together. I know what you were saying about the claim that we acted based on the MGT study. The MGT study was really just, that was a long time coming, just to find the true cost of operating fire. But certainly I think the board made their decision not lightly. I think it was led to a natural conclusion by 3 years of frustrating negotiations and trying to come to terms.
Okay, so I think Mr. Laddie?
Can I just add one comment? One of the last correspondence that I had sent to Mr. Griffin, and again, Supervisor Bennett forwarded this information to Mayor Soderstrom. That was that we're ready to provide service based on the cost identified in the MGT study, and that we're willing to do that on a long-term basis or even a short-term basis. And I want to make sure that that's the case, because one of the things that we didn't make clear was that they had the option to engage in an agreement perhaps as short as 90 days or 60 days or even 30 days, or as long as 10 years, depending on where we want it to go in terms of length of time, but also to recognize that they may have some short-term needs to have coverage while they explore other options. Am I correct in that statement that we're willing to entertain a short-term contract with them or a long-term contract or anything in between?
Yes,
Absolutely.
you're absolutely correct.
Because I feel like I should respond to Attorney Griffin and let him know that that option is available. Also, and I think I need to reiterate, and this is something that Trustee Massey pointed out, we adopted a resolution to dissolve. We met the notice requirements of that resolution, and we're moving forward with the dissolution. And if I had to make a comment, as one of the folks that had to head over to Attorney Griffin's office to begin discussions to try to come to some agreeable language of the ordinances, honestly, from my perspective, we are farther apart now than where we started. And we started talking about the cost of running the fire department and how much, not necessarily how much each party should pay, but the cost of running the fire department. And 2 years later, we found out through an objective, cooperative study that actually none of us understood fully the cost of operating the fire department. And frankly, we have to act on that study. And the biggest thing, and I haven't heard the city talk about this, and I know we talk about it, we haven't talked about our deferred equipment. Probably the most important aspect of our fire department that we have known that we had to address and hasn't ever been addressed in the 2-year discussion by the city is that we are falling behind in our equipment. And we need to move forward with that. And we heard discussion Tuesday night that the chief's going to move ahead with the ladder truck and begin to get proposals. So what I'm taking from you, and I'd like some confirmation, the resolution stands. We're ready, willing, and able to offer service at the cost that it costs us to provide, the MGT study, plus the unrealized expenses, plus the capital fund, the 6-year capital fund plan. They can have it as short or as long as they want it, and let's have their answer.
Plus the OPEB, right?
Well, now that's interesting because that's part of a dissolution process for our old model of operation. And so we still have to have an accounting. We have to reduce the present day value of our equipment to its value, and we're going to have some discussion with them about how much equity they have in that present day value. That'll be a little bit tricky, but it's not hard to find a company that's going to go ahead and do the appraisal. We asked them for some feedback or some cooperation in that appraisal process. And unlike the Parks and Rec response that maybe over-responded, we didn't get an answer on that appraisal process. And so that is a separate issue. That is the dissolution issue, and that's accounting for the asset and then paying them their share of it. The other thing we have to do is we have to have a reconciliation of the OPEB obligation for those employees that we have an obligation for. And again, that's a dissolution question.
Well, Mr. Laddie, I don't believe, and I shouldn't assume that I know, but I mean, we could ask our expert, our fire chief, how long it takes to start up a new fire department. But I would think trying to find firefighters this day and age is not an easy task. But what's discouraging is that we haven't heard any response to our offer that we're going to need some more time or something along these lines. But I guess my feeling is there needs to be an end date. It can't just be something that continues on in perpetuity and we never really get to the end. So I'm a little bit hesitant to just say that we'll go month by month on this thing. I don't know. It's just I kind of have a concern out there. I'm not sure where everybody else on the board feels, but Ms. Lane?
Mr. Supervisor, I think that the city, by sending the letter we received late tonight, is in an indirect way saying that they are not going to be looking to build or their own fire department and start from scratch. So I think it's simply a matter of our saying, here is the proposal, and let's get it signed and let's move on and continue the service that we're providing and relieve anybody's concern that somebody's going to have a danger to their property. So I think we don't need to talk about, I personally don't feel that we need to talk about their even considering another option. I think they were, they have indicated by this letter to me anyway, that they have heard the facts, they understand the facts, and they want a joint agreement, but we're proposing an actual contract
Service.
with them.
Yeah.
And I
You could be right.
And so that's, with
Okay.
all the discussions, that's where I think it stands as of receiving this letter today.
Any other thoughts from board members on the direction that we go with this?
No, Al said that I can't speak anymore on this, so.
I mean, in terms of offering them anything further than what we've offered them
I
already?
think, personally, I think the letter that Attorney Laddie said spells it out.
Right.
I don't know what else we can say.
Yeah.
Do it in smoke signals, because they're not understanding it.
So leave it at, you're saying, you
I
and
agree
Mr.
with-
Manswer are saying
agree with
that
Mr.
the letter that was
Manswer.
sent already stands.
I
Yeah,
thought you
it's-
wanted a little more detail.
Well,
you know?
that was the other thing we talked about was
Right.
is we outlined in broad terms what we'd send what would cost them. We'd supply service at the cost,
Which we did.
which was in our initial thing. But if we wanted to provide any more detail around it, you know, a specific proposal for them to react to. But you know, at this point, I guess we haven't really heard that they're willing to even consider a service contract.
I would hate to have Mr. Laddie spend a lot of time on a contract when they haven't even
So-
accepted the offer.
So maybe the point is we just you know, we remind them that you know, we sent this resolution out and we were expecting a response back from whether they want to continue to get fire protection from the township for a fee.
Well, we did get a response back from them, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Attorney Griffin send us something back saying that if you can respond to this, or do I have to go to Circuit Court 67 and bring you into court so we can officially have an injunction? So I think they understand it, they just don't want to believe it.
Well,
What was the correspondence, Mr.
no,
Laddie?
yeah, it was, and it was February 11th from Attorney Griffin, and he was he raised the issue of Fire Station 1. He also made a point of if it turns out that the city's going to be uncovered as of April 25th, that he may need to seek an injunctive relief because they're uniquely concerned with risk of lives and damage to property. So what I'm happy to do in correspondence back is to say, first of all, we fully understand that we're ready, willing, and able to provide services to the city of Grand Blanc and maintain service at Grand Blanc Township. As of April 26th, we're happy to do it at the rate that's identified in the MGT study, and we'll do it for as long or as little as you need. But tell us that you're interested. If there are details of this discussion, or details of how we'll provide the service, and what the payment schedule will be, and how long they want it, tell us that you're interested, and we'll begin that discussion. We'll discuss some of the details of providing the service, including the length of the agreement, but other than that, nothing's changed.
So the agreement would have a definite length of time in it.
Oh, I think it should. And like I said, I said month to month, and there may be, you may say, no, we can't do anything less than 60 days or 90 days, but anywhere between the minimum period of time and the maximum, which I'm guessing is a number of years, let us know that any of that appeals to you, and we'll begin discussion. But I also want to make clear, on April 26th, it's business as usual for Grand Blanc Fire Department. We though expect the city to begin to pay the costs identified in the MGT study. We're not going to continue, whether they want to call it subsidizing, whatever they want to call it, we're not going to operate under those old numbers. We know how much it costs to operate a department, and that's what we're going to pay, and that's what they're going to pay.
Yeah. Mr. Massey, and then Ms. Lane.
Mr. Chair, here's what I believe. I assume all the board members read the letter from Attorney Griffin. I'm making that assumption. We received 2 letters from the city. This is my interpretation of what I read. That letter that the attorney sent, it's, in my opinion, it's an inadequate letter. He's vague about everything. He's over in, we over here in the swimming pool, he's over there in the ocean somewhere. So we're falling into a trap that we're trying to respond to these nonsense letters. And we got to be very cautious about that, okay? Yeah. Attorney Griffin represents the city. But the only thing that I got from the letter that Attorney Griffin listened to the video and used the same language that we use at our meeting against us. So why should we respond to somebody using the same language? One of the board members mentioned the word injunction. So he decided to put in his letter. So we got to wake up and start thinking. These letters, they don't mean anything. We have outlined the path that we're gonna take. So that we stay focused and stay on the path.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Mr. Lane?
There is one item that I think that Attorney Laddie still needs to address through Attorney Griffin. I understand where this board wants to go and how we are going to offer a contract to the city. But on April 26th, in a cooperative way, because we're not talking, everybody's saying we did this with facts, we still have to have an agreement with the city on whether or not we keep the office and the trucks that are in Station 1 there, and that will be where we function from until and whenever things change in the future when a decision has to be made. So there is some discussion that has to continue there. Otherwise, we're going to have cots somewhere in Station 2 or 3. So again, in a matter of being professional, knowing that we are saying to the community, we are going to keep this fire department going, we are going to protect you, we want you to feel comfortable and safe. There still has to be a cooperative discussion about operating out of Station 1 for some period of time.
Well, actually, maybe, I thought we had covered this, but we actually sent another correspondence to the city since our board meeting last month. Mr. Laddie did, that basically told them that we need to know by March 1st what their intention is, because my intention is that if we don't hear by March 1st that they're going to take advantage of a contract for services, then we are going to we've already begun making plans to house our firefighters in Station 2 or 3. We actually, with Redstone, who is doing the space needs analysis here, has shared information with Mr. Lehman and myself, and with, I believe, Chief Burdett as well, on the outline of where we can house our firefighters come April 25th if we are not going to provide services. So I'm not, on the same note that I'm not assuming that, this letter says that they're not going to go on their own. I'm not going to assume that we're going to be in Station 1. And we're going to make provisions that if we find out that on March 1st that there's no response to our request to know whether or not they're going to accept our offer for a contract for services, then we start to work on our next contingency, which is to move our firefighters into our office or what have you to the appropriate place based on, again, fact-based decisions. We've studied the run times. The chief has seen those. We had Beckett and Rader look at the run times over the past year or two. We've mapped them out. I can show you if our board wants to see.
It's going to be quicker, isn't it?
But the bottom line is that we don't have to be nebulous in terms of, well, we're going to continue or no. We've offered a contract for services. March 1st comes and we haven't heard whether or not the city is going to accept our offer for a contract, then we go into our next contingency, which is to look at the plans that Beckett and Rader have prepared for Mr. Limita. And we start looking, we've already got space allocated for it, but we'll spend a few dollars on building out some bunks, what have you. And on April 25th or sooner, and I want to put our residents at ease and our friends in the city, and also it goes for our friends in Burton, our friends in Mundy Township, Atlas, Holly. That certainly, I've seen where our fire trucks are in Burton helping. We're not going to disregard the countywide mutual aid agreement that we have. However, if we don't hear a response from the city by March 1st, we're going to take that as they aren't interested in agreement, and we're going to start going to our next contingency. Is that the consensus, I think?
Yes.
I just say that, regardless of what we decide on this, next step here, I think it's completely appropriate for us to begin the valuation that we talked about of the, evaluating the Station 1 assets and that kind of thing. So we certainly could respond back in that way.
Respond back in the way that we are going to
Yeah,
begin
we
the
need,
asset.
exactly right.
We have to.
Yeah.
One would be the time frame for starting that appraisal. I mean, because if we go our separate ways, we're going to need to divide up some equipment, obviously.
We're not stopping anything.
Let me propose a timeline for you. Dennis and I are scheduled to meet on Monday, and I think that what we can do is draw up an outline for the appraisal process for the personal property. I'm glad to hear, and I knew this before, but I'm glad to hear Supervisor Bennett can confirm this, that there are contingency plans for the deployment of our services. Given if we have a different change in location, if we're going to have to focus on a different fire station, that we're still able to carry out our obligations to the township and the city. But why don't we, I think that we can draw all this up and get this information to Attorney Griffin on Monday afternoon and let him know exactly where we stand and keep that March deadline as our deadline.
Mr. Thomas?
Would this work for you, through you to Trustee Massey? Would this work for you that we, as a board, we don't respond to this letter, and then our response will be the response that Attorney Laddie comes up with on Monday?
Yes, it's in the hands of the attorney and the superintendent.
Does that work for everyone?
Yes, that works well.
Yeah, we haven't answered the letter. We just
Yes.
tell them where our facts are.
Right.
But we don't want to. Station 1, that's out of my mind now. I don't want them to feel that we're, even if they purchase fire service to them, none of us should be saying that keeping Station 1 open is going to be a certainty forever. I mean, that was one of our. Pardon?
No, I didn't intend it to be a
Oh,
certainty
no.
forever.
No, because that was one of our issues when the city said, well, we expect Station 1 to be open for forever.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to be concerned of our residents.
But one thing, let me say
Yeah,
something.
Mr. Massey.
One thing, when you get in negotiation, you have to be cognizant of this. You may have one direction you're going, and you may end up going another direction. So everything is on the table, right?
Well, I'm afraid that's exactly that's where we are. We're trying to negotiate a service agreement, and they're trying to renegotiate the joint resolution from 1977. I mean, so we need to make it clear to them that we've moved beyond that.
Right.
Okay.
I'm a thank you card and right no thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, and I'm looking forward to being able to move on to other issues, and I know we can chew gum and walk at the same time, and we have been, and we've been covering a lot of other ground with our DDA and lots of other exciting stuff, and I know in the meantime this hasn't consumed all of Mr. Lehman's time. He's been meeting with potential developers and some really great exciting stuff that if one of the dozen things that he's been meeting with people about comes about, it not only will be great for Grand Blanc Township, but it'll be great for this region of the state or the county. So we are conducting business, but it will be good to take this issue and move it into an operational issue. We've got a great fire chief. I think one of the things that's been missing from all this coverage of this issue is that the study revealed what a great fire department we have. And I think, in the coming weeks, I think we're going to have to highlight that to let it be known that, one of the things we discovered is what a great job they do and the patience they've had, because I'm sure that they've had a little bit of, wondering how this is all going to shake out. But again, it's for the best of our community, and I think our firefighters are going to feel like they've got a more stable place of employment, and we're going to be able to focus on growing our community in lots of different ways. So.
Can I bring up one quick thing, and it's not to do with the agreement and such. Chief Burdett, last night I heard briefly what I did hear of the meeting, that They did, according to your raise, maybe I should be talking to.
I think we're gonna cover some of that issue in the executive session, or would that be a better place, or can we talk, the city didn't approve,
They didn't even
the
make
fire
the
chief's,
motion.
They tabled it.
No, they didn't
No.
even table it,
they
did they?
didn't table it, there was never a motion. There was no motion,
There was no motion, so they can't table a non-motion.
there was no motion,
There was.
no,
So
I
that-
listened to it, there was no motion.
I listened to
They
it three.
chose not to talk.
It died
We
from-
can, this is a topic, if you want to address this topic, we have to address other employment agreements in
Yes.
an executive session, so you can do that then.
Yeah, so let's talk about it in there. Is there any other business? I guess I just wanted
It's not
to,
very transparent.
is there some reports? Mr. Limita probably has quite a bit to report on, but I don't want to cut him short because we're wanting to get an executive session, so go ahead, Mr. Limita.
I can make it brief. One of the reasons that you guys are being asked to consider an executive session this evening is because the merit increases all employees. We go through the performance evaluation process every January. All those have been completed as of last week, and I have a recommendation for some potential merit increases for employees I'd like the board to consider. You also have a couple of contracts that I think should be at the top of your mind. One is Police Chief Wiles, whose agreement expires in April. And we also have, speaking of expiring, is Chief Burdett's was June or July of this year, something like that, and his will expire also. So I think that I'd like to have that conversation as far as from a negotiation standpoint, the executive session. It has been incredibly busy in between the Parks and Recreation discussions, fire discussions, and providing some information on that. We do have, like I mentioned earlier, the actuarial evaluation came in late tonight. I'm just verifying some information, and we'll send it out to the board for your review. We'll also include the one from 3 years prior, so you have some comparison tools to look at. I was hoping that it would be better than it was, but our actual actuarial evaluation increased. But part of that I want the board to understand, and it may help if I send out the previous one, is that the state is going to require a uniform set of assumptions followed by everybody after 2019. Because of that, I asked them to include those assumptions with this valuation, because I think if those are going to be the standard assumptions that we should have incorporated them now, so that of course had some impact. Also, we asked last time, we were used to amortize it at 30 years. We asked them to take a year off every year until we get it down to 20 years, so that we're actually going to have 20 to 25 years that everybody's was covered during their length of service. So every year it drops off a year, so the prior amortization schedule was for 30 years. This one is for 27 years. We're going to be doing them every 2 years from now, so the next one you'll see will be at 25 years, and it will continue down until we get to 20. That has an impact, obviously, on it. The good news is our assets actually doubled. We were at $4.5 million in 2014. We were over $9 million for the one December 31st of 2017. So there is some good news, the actions we've taken. And of course, not all of the actions that we've taken are included in this actuarial evaluation. Like the post-65 employees going to the Hartford as of January 1st of 2019, huge impact. That brings those premiums down to over $2,000 to just around $400 a month. So a huge impact. And again, our contractual obligations that we put into place really happened during the end of 2017, January 1 to August 1. So while we picked up some of that, it didn't have as much impact as it could have. But you'll see it. I think it'll be interesting. And then lastly, we will just mention some economic development activity. It's been a whirlwind of activity for the last month. Very exciting time for us to start to consider these things. I've taken the DPW pickup trucks and bounced around through some frozen tundra to show off some of the sites that we have available in the township to a group. Of course, we have a non-disclosure agreement. We can't give that information out, but if those were to come to fruition, it would have an incredible impact upon, like Supervisor Bennett said, not only Grand Blanc Township, but all of the Grand Blanc community and probably the greater Genesee County community. But hopefully we've got some additional meetings scheduled. Just an incredible amount of interest, and I think thank you to the board for the creation of the DDA and moving that forward. because that absolutely has had a huge impact on the level of interest that's picked up in the short term.
Well, that's no small feat, doubling the assets in how many, in just a few short years.
From December 31st of 2014 to December 31st of 2017, we more than doubled the assets that we had. So
That is phenomenal, Mr. Lemon.
Yes.
And we appreciate your diligence to it. I know it's been an issue that's lingered for many years, and I appreciate you attacking that head on and continuing to attack that. It's something that is going to become even more public as municipalities are required to put together plans to, corrective action plans, what have you. So I'm very pleased that we're out in front of that issue. With that, I guess we'll entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss merit raises and employment
Mr. Chairman.
contracts.
So moved.
Okay, motion by Ms. Lane, support by Mr. Massey. Ms. Lane?
Roll call vote. Mr. Mansour,
Yes.
Mr. Thomas, Mr. Adkins,
Yes.
Mr. Guzak,
Yes.
Mr. Massey,
Yes.
myself, Mr. Supervisor.
Yes.
10 minutes?
5.
Thank you.
Jesus.